Hi, my name is Dovitate from 314 Dragon Studios, and today I'm going to be showing you how to use the Era plugin set. There will be chapters in the description if you want to jump to the tutorial for a specific plugin, but without further ado and without any fluff, here we go. So the first plugin we're going to take a look at is Era Controller, and this allows you to control the inputs and outputs of your lights and samples track from just one single track. This is especially useful for multi-launchpad projects where instead of having to set inputs and outputs for 6 different tracks, you'll only need to do it for 3. So to use the plugin, we're going to create a dummy MIDI track, and this will just be used as our controller. We will set our input and our output to our Launchpad and drag an Era controller device onto it. And from here, we'll have 3 options: input, output, and bus. On this first track here, we're going to set it to bus. And this is going to set up all of our controllers and trigger options. And we'll walk through all of these in a second. On your samples track, you're going to want to drag a controller right in front of your instrument rack, and you will set it to input mode. You'll then do the same thing on your lights track, controller set to input mode, and then you will grab another controller and set it to output mode. Now, if you're doing a project with multiple launchpads, then on the second launchpad, you will need to change all of these IDs to 2. And then for your third launchpad, you'll set them to 3, etc. And once you arm this track to record, you will be able to control your sampling track as well as your lights track from one single track. So from the controller selection, it has options for most common MIDI controllers. So the options that you have are enable top row, which is if you're not using custom firmware, or if you're on a Launchpad Mark II, it just translates the MIDI to top row, which means you don't need to use a bespoke top lights plugin. There's copy to extra lights, which for the Launchpad Pro just copies lights to the mode light. On the Launchpad Pro Mark III, it fills out the bottom row and also moves lights to the logo and shift buttons. Reduce flickering is just built-in please quiet down, and reduce after image is just built-in doorstop. Now in the triggers tab, you have a few different settings. You can enable and disable the stop audio and lights button, as well as the reset multi-devices button. And this reset multi-devices button does work with Cascoby's plugins as well as Matiazzi's plugins. You can remap these buttons using the map buttons here. And there is this other option which I ported from Unipad that I really like. It is Reset Multi on Page Switch. And this does exactly what it says on the tin. It will reset all multi-sampling plugins to the first sample in the cycle when the page switches. Then in the Project tab, you have your channel ID as well as the current page that is selected. Now this only works if auto page is on. Now auto page just removes the need to map pages to your project file. You can choose local auto page, and local auto page will only change the page within the channel that the device is set to, whereas global auto page will set the page of all devices in the project file. Now the next plugin that I have to show off is called Lightspeed, and this is essentially a drum rack for lights. So you have your drum rack layout here. You can select your quadrant of the Launchpad. It also automatically updates when you press on your Launchpad, just like the drum rack. And to map a light to a button, all you need to do is drag the light effect onto the button, and it will play. You also have this transform menu on the side. Now, these transforms are exclusive to the buttons, so if you flip this light effect, it's not going to flip every other light effect. So to demonstrate this, we'll get the same light effect on 2 different buttons, and we will flip this one, and you'll see that they work individually. There's also a rotate section. There is an option to turn on edger. There is an option for infinite hold, as well as an option to choke light effect. And any light effect can be sent to one of 8 receiver tracks if you need to do a bit more fine post-processing on it. The next plugin I would like to talk about is Supersonic. Now, Supersonic is a sampling plugin. It is a cut-down version of the drum rack. It features 8 choke groups and the ability to fade samples in and out. If you want to choke all your samples at once, you can hold Alt, and that will apply the choke to all of the samples. And same with the fade in. If you hold Alt, you can apply the fade to every sample. Now, the main appeal of Supersonic comes in with the mapping mode. Now, we have this song here. It is Brain Blast by Son of the Mob and Frame Perfect. And I've already cut it up into samples, and I have cropped the samples by selecting all of them, right-clicking and hitting crop clips. And if I select the first sample in the sequence and turn on the playing mode and Supersonic, and then I'll also enable this headphone icon so that I can hear the samples. If I tap the buttons on my Launchpad, it will automatically map the next sample in the sequence to the button I pressed on my Launchpad. And now you will see and if I have misplaced a sample that I want to move, say for instance, I don't like where that sample is, I can hold Alt and click on the mode button to go into remapping mode. I can tap on my Launchpad to select that sample, and then I can move it to wherever I want. So next is Cycle Lights. This is just a basic lights multi-sample plugin. You drag in your lights as so, and then you set the length of your cycle, and then your multi-sampling works. And similarly, there is a plugin called Cycle Samples, which is the same thing, but for samples. So right here, I have a short section of the build-up from Brain Blast. And what we will need to do is grab the samples and one by one drag them into the multi-sampling plugin, making sure, of course, that they are cropped before you do this. And of course, set your cycle length, and you're done. Now, if you've decided that you messed up, you placed a sample that you didn't want, you want to remove it from the cycle, you just have to click this X right here and it will remove the sample from the cycle. The release trigger option allows the lights or the samples to be activated when the button is let go of, as well as when it is pressed. The reset cycle button just resets the cycle back to the beginning, and the reset all button completely resets the plugin. The C option adds a choke, so if I turn that off, all of these samples can play on top of each other. Whereas if I press the choke button, they are not allowed to, and one stops when the next one plays. Next is Lightspeed. Lightspeed looks like your typical MIDI file player with some extra fancy stuff built in. Let's drag a MIDI file into here and play that. And you'll notice, let's flip it, and then let's also bypass it, and then let's also put an edger on it. And you'll notice none of that's happening to the actual light effect. Well, that is because Lightspeed is incredibly lightweight for all of these transforms it has. All of these options are actually not affecting the light effect in this plugin. You need the Lightspeed processor at the end of your chain. If you're using Era controller, you'll want to put it before your Era controller. But once the Lightspeed processor is at the end of your chain, suddenly your light effect has all of the changes you wanted to make to it. And this saves on RAM, plugin size, project file loading speed, because there is just not as much going on within the plugin, because it is all being deferred to this smaller plugin. Borealis is a simple velocity to velocity remapper. If you know what velocity value you want to change, you can set that on your velocity in. So we want to change, in my color palette, 7 is the brightest white, And say we want to change that to red, which is value 127. And you see how that affects the light effect. If I turn Borealis off, and then if I turn it on. Now you might be thinking, big deal, you can do this with velocity, but the real tool comes in when you start adjusting other colors, because you can, in fact, map multiple colors to other colors. So you can completely change the color theme of a light effect using this plugin. So with this one plugin, I was able to recolor this light effect. The next plugin is Fader. Now this is a fader with a built-in note filter, and this solves a couple pet peeves that I have with other fader devices, which is either when the fades are really long, the device gets physically ginormous, as well as not being able to actually see the colors in your fade as you create it. So I have solved this by creating fader. So you can add colors and the device width stays the same. You click on a spot in the fade to adjust it, and to set a color, you can just turn the velocity slider. You can adjust the length of each individual color in the fade, as well as the length of the fade itself. Then there is Output Effects. Output Effects is an all-in-one transform plugin that you can just drop on a light effect and do anything you want to it. You want to block out some of the notes, turn on the note filter, and then block out whatever notes you don't want to appear on the Launchpad. You want to remap the colors? Go ahead, remap the colors. Borealis is right there. You want to add a fade to your plugin? Enable the fader. Do the fader stuff. There's a fader here. You want to shift the light effect around on the Launchpad? Go ahead and shift it around on the Launchpad. You want to flip it? Go ahead, flip it. It's all there. You want to put an edger on it? Put an edger on it. You can do all sorts of crazy stuff in this plugin, and it all gets processed in the order that they are in the sidebar here. Now in the settings tab, there are a few different settings. Now if you're just using this very basically, you can leave this settings tab alone. You don't need to change anything. However, you can also do some interesting stuff with it. You can set the input to the effects. Instead of being the MIDI going into it, you can set it to be a channel, and this will receive from a receiver channel. You can define the channel here, up to 8 different channels. You can have it output to the MIDI, just going straight out of the device, or it can output to a receiver channel. Bypass to MIDI will send the original light effect out through MIDI, as well as sending the processed light effect to wherever you tell it to go. And bypass to channel will send the original light effect to the channel that you defined. So the sender device is just a sender with 96 channels. It also has a bypass filter to let the MIDI go through, as well as outputting to the channel. You can have the sender send to a receiver, which will also send it to output effects, or you can have it output to the controller, which will make the Era sender act as if it were an Era output device. The Era receiver is just a receiver with 96 channels, and the ability to also receive MIDI from MIDI portal. Now, there's a very good question that I'm sure some of you have, and that question is, hey, I have seen velocity colors appear in these plugins. What if I'm using a different color palette than you're using, Dovey? Well, to that I say, we have a plugin that handles that. So to stop you from having to upload your custom palette to every single plugin that uses a custom palette, I have made a single plugin that goes on your master track, and it is called Spectrum. It allows you to choose from the default RGB palette, the Launchpad S palette, and a custom palette. Now the custom palette by default is our in-house palette, but you can click this load palette button and load up any palette you want. For instance, the very popular Mattiazzi palette. It also has this handy pop-out window, which works very well in tandem with the listen feature on plugins such as Borealis and Fader. So for instance, if you aren't too familiar with all of your velocity colors, you can just have your palette right here, click listen on whatever velocity value you want to set, and then click the color. Boom. And then boom, very quick. This allows for very, very fast gradients to be made in the Fader plugin. Now for you Matiatsi palette users, I have added a nice little treat. I have been very kind to you because I have added a secondary layout which makes the Matiatsi palette much more readable. All you have to do is click on this 5x8x3 button and look at that. Isn't that so much nicer to look at for you Matiatsi palette users? And this makes it even easier to create your fades. And finally, there is one plugin left, and that plugin, now time travel is basically just Wormhole, but for Era, because sadly, plugins like Wormhole and Twist and Black Hole do not work with the Era controller. And so to mitigate that, I have created this time travel plugin. You can choose between local and global page mode. If you're in local mode, you can set your channel ID. You can choose which page to travel to. So for instance here, if I hit this button, I should be transported to page 3. There you go, page 3, it happened. And that, my friends, is how you can use the 314 Dragon Era plugin set in your project files. If you have any questions, leave them down in the comments below. If you haven't already, make sure to join the Launchpad community Discord server. There's a lot going on in the Launchpad community, not just with me, but with other people, and if you want to keep in touch with that, then you should definitely join the server. That being said, my name is Dovey. Thank you so much for watching. I will see you later. Bye.